If you have an addict or an alcoholic in your life, chances are you're angry, frustrated, worried, scared, a lot of emotions. We totally understand. We've worked with a lot of families going through the same thing that you're going through right now. You want them to get help. You would love for them to not have this addiction, but you don't know what to do. This is why we put together Family Reconnect. This is a program that is designed to put you first. Ultimately, if you help yourself, you can help them. In this, we're going to teach you how to set appropriate boundaries. We're going to teach you how to communicate effectively. We're going to teach you how to go into situations with your addict loved one that is going to be effective. A lot of times, family members and loved ones, they act out of emotion. We get that, we understand. But all that does is make it worse. You need people to come alongside you that can walk this journey with you. So starting on June 3rd, we are going live. We want you to be a part of this community. Because remember, you didn't cause this. You can't cure it, and you definitely can't control it. So June 3rd is when we're going live. You can find all the information at realrecoverytalk.com/FRC. Again, it's realrecoverytalk.com/FRC. We're excited to go on this journey with you, and we'll see you on June 3rd. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is week 6 of the Big Book Study. Now, today we're getting into the second half of There Is a Solution. Eric does a phenomenal job, as always, breaking this down line by line. I know you're going to love it. Enjoy the show.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be back live. Let's go ahead and open this with a moment of silence and then followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's good to be back. Today I want to say to my beautiful wife, Allie, today is her 9 years of continuous sobriety, and you are an absolute beacon of hope and light to those still suffering. My admiration for you knows no bounds, and I'm so proud of you and grateful for you, and I love you with all my heart. And with that being said, last week we got into the first part of There Is a Solution, which talked about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. He used the analogy from steerage to captain's table and to describe the fellowship. We are like passengers of a great ocean liner the moment after shipwreck. And I broke down what that was. We talked about the fellowship and they talked about the disease. And now we're going to get into the solution for the second half of this. And the solution, when we get into that, the whole purpose of this program is to affect a spiritual experience significant enough to bring about a complete psychic change. And a psychic change is an improved shift in thought and behavior. It's just a shift. I use this analogy all the time. If you're on an airplane and an airplane shifts a half a degree, it doesn't seem like a lot, but over time that will land you on an entire another continent. And that's what this program does. My behavior begins to change. Some people have a white light moment and they have that, moment that just they change immediately. But for most of us, it's a gradual shift in thought and behavior. And that shift, that psychic change or personality change, if you will, that the book is going to talk about here, will be sufficient enough to bring about recovery from alcoholism. And that's what we're going to describe in There Is a Solution. It's all about change, and I'm going to point out to you everywhere where it says change. So let's go back for a minute. We're going to start on page 24 just to review the last full paragraph. When this sort of thinking he's talking about is the obsession we suffer from an allergy to alcohol when we put it in us that brings about a phenomenon of craving, and then we suffer from an obsession of the mind that compels us to drink once we're stark raving sober. And so what he's talking about here is that obsessive thinking. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history, but for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but cannot. And so when we talked about the fellowship and compared that to the great ocean liner, at the end of that paragraph when it said a couple of pages earlier here he says, but that would not have held us together as we are now bound. And he goes on, he says, that is not the great news that this book, that is, let me just go back and read it real quick before I butcher it. But he says, on page 17, he says, the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So the great news that this book carries is the spiritual program of action, the solution. It's not the fellowship. Fellowship is absolutely necessary, but the great, tremendous fact is the solution. And that's what they mean here when he says he's probably placed himself beyond human aid, and the fellowship is made up of human beings, alcoholics, just as powerless as I am, just as powerless as you are. The solution is in these 12 steps. So here we go. There is a solution. That's what we're here for. Almost none of us liked the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. Consummation means to ingest it, to digest it, I guess you would say. But we saw that it really worked in others. We had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. If you are an alcoholic like me, and you hit that bottom, and you believed in the hopelessness, my life, I was a homeless alcoholic. I was homeless, living in a homeless park. That was hopeless. And then it says in the futility of life, to go on living was futile. There was no purpose in it. My life lacked any type of purpose. I saw no reason to carry on. So we had come to believe in the hopelessness and the futility of life as we had been living it. So not life itself, but as we had been living it. My alcoholism, my addiction brought me to a point where as I was living it, there was absolutely no hope and no purpose and no point in carrying on. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet, and that's those 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized. And what's a revolution? It's a change. It's revolutionized. It's changed our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. We've had a revolutionary change in our attitude towards our fellows, the people around us, towards God's universe, and towards my life. And that's exactly what this change is. And I hear people say this all the time, and it's kind of a rehab thing, not really AA thing, but they say, when we talk about change, when I came in here and I heard change, what has to change? Everything has to change. That's a non-answer. What do you mean everything has to change? And then I'd hear him say, well, people, places, and things have to change. People, places, and things have to change. That sounds a lot like a geographical change to me. And the book tells us that geographical changes don't work. If I move from here, South Florida, North Carolina, I'm changing people, I'm changing places, and I'm changing things, right? This chapter, this book tells us precisely what has to change. It says ideals, emotions, and attitudes that were once the driving forces of those men's lives have been cast aside, and a whole new set of ideals, emotions, and attitudes begin to dominate them. That's the change that we're talking about. I still have a lot of the same people in my life as when I was drinking and drugging. I still go to a lot of the same places that I went to when I was drinking and drugging. And I still do a lot of the same things that I did when I was drinking and drugging. But today, I have a whole new set of ideals, emotions, and attitudes towards those people, towards those places, and towards those things. It's my attitude towards life that's changed. So we've had to revolutionize our whole attitude towards life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us by which we could never do by ourselves. And there's an asterisk here after spiritual experiences. So when there's an asterisk, we go and we read that asterisk. We read what it's telling us to read because it's really, really important. You'll find the spiritual experience at the end of the book in the, is it the appendix they call it? Back here on page 567. So on page 567, this is the spiritual experience. They're going to mention the spiritual experiences multiple times throughout this book, and you'll see the asterisk there every time. This is worth reading multiple times. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening, are used many times in this book, which, upon careful reading, shows that the personality change, there it is, personality change, sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So right there, they call it a personality change. Other places, they call it a psychic change. Other instances, they call it a spiritual experience. Okay, but it says a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes, there it is again, or religious experiences. So it says personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. And what's an upheaval? It's a drastic change. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it is not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming, if you overwhelm something, what are you doing? You're changing it entirely. They must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. You starting to get the idea about change here? Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, and what is a transformation? It is an absolute change from one thing to another. Yet such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. And that this is often the case, it was with me, that friends started to notice that I was changing before I even did. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration, which is a change, a profound change in his reaction to life. That such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find, and this is really important here, with few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with as their own conception of a power greater than themselves. With few exceptions, our members find they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. And that's what it was for me. I see God's work everywhere. I see God everywhere, but I don't find God out there. I find God in here and in every human being that I come in contact with. From this day until my last, the God of my understanding lives in that translation and how I treat that person. This is absolutely an inside job. Recovery is absolutely an inside job. I spent all my life looking for God out there. I spent all my life looking for what I needed out there, and it wasn't. It was in here. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of a spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it a God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems, honestly is a key word there, of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. All I need is my mind to be open a little bit to spiritual concepts. I had to stop saying no, and start saying maybe. That's all it took for me to gain that little bit of willingness. Most emphatically, I just read that. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. No, I'm not an alcoholic. No, that's not going to work for me. These people are crazy. They're lunatics. This is a cult. No, I'm not like that. That's belligerent denial and intolerance. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. They're absolutely necessary, and I cannot give them to you. We can take you, look, in this program, we can take you by the hand. We can walk you through the steps. We can show you what we did. I can teach this book to you. What we cannot do is we cannot make you willing. We cannot make you honest. And I can't make you open-minded. Those are on you. You know, what made me willing, though, was out there. The pain got great enough, and I did the work. It was the pain that made me willing. There is a principle, which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. That means, so what that quote means is contempt prior to investigation. That's me walking into AA and before I know anything about it saying, this is a cult. This is nuts. These guys are lying. That's not going to work for me. That's not going to work for me. I need this type of sponsor. I need, when I have no idea. And I'm making all these assumptions and all these judgments before I know the first thing about what I'm dealing with here. There's a saying in here, and it's so true. You just don't know what you don't know. And that was me when I came in. I had no idea how much I didn't know. So that's in the appendix. That's the spiritual experience. So let's go back now after reading that, back to the basic text, and we're back to last paragraph on page 25. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. So if you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, meaning we're at death's door, we want to die, we can't stop drinking. If you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. And there is no middle-of-the-road solution. I don't think there's anything worse that I've seen in recovery. I don't think there's any worse feeling in recovery than to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I see people do that for years, in and out. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, meaning, I don't really want to get sober. I can't, but I know I can't drink and drug anymore. But I don't really have a solution because I'm not all in. And I'm riding that fence, and that's a horrible place to be. It's miserable. So we believe there's no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, and what that means is there's no return. Mom can't help me. Dad can't help me. Wife can't help me. Judge can't help me. Doctors can't help me. There's no return through human aid. If we pass through the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but 2 alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blocking out the consciousness of our intolerable situation. That's step 1, understanding I'm going to die an alcoholic death. I'm going to go on to the bitter end is step 1, admitting that I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to the bitter end if I don't do something about this, right? blotting out the consciousness of our intolerant situation as best we could. And the other, which is step 2, is to accept spiritual help. That's the crossroad that I'm at when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to die. I'm going on. There's nothing for me left except an alcoholic death, drug addict's death, or suicide, locked up in an institution somewhere, or I get help. I get spiritual help. That's the crossroad I'm at. This we did because we honestly wanted to, and we were willing to make the effort. An American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. And one sanitarium to another, you can just replace that with from one rehab to another. So here's a rich guy, high character, going from rehab to rehab. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrists. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. They're talking about Dr. Carl Jung, who was at the time one of the greatest therapists or psychologists in the world. And Dr. Jung was all about spirituality. And he's the one who gave us the spiritual experience, or the spiritual solution, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. But self-knowledge isn't going to keep us sober. We read about that in Bill's story. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to this doctor whom he admired and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society, and he would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he is expected to live long. This was a great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. That attitude is that psychic change that comes through those 12 steps, right? And so this sentence it kind of cracks me up in a way, because only for the alcoholic do they have to throw this in here. It says he can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go without disaster. Only for the alcoholic do we have to have that qualifier. Without, what it really should say is he can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. But it doesn't. They have to throw the without disaster in there, because I couldn't go anywhere without disaster. It followed me when I was drinking and drugging. It followed me everywhere. Tom was talking about, he was talking about his trip to Nashville. I went on a trip to Nashville. Simple vacation in Nashville. Who's been to jail in Nashville now? This guy. Who does that? I couldn't go anywhere without disaster. It followed me. It just cracks me up that they have to put that in there. I can laugh about that today. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where the state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. And phenomena means they're inexplainable. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements. And if you displace something, you're changing it. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, change. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Change. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. Change. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. Here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had the extraordinary experience which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. So here's the dilemma. He's got to stop drinking, but he doesn't want to pick up the spiritual experience. He doesn't want to live by those principles. And, it sounds crazy that would be a dilemma, right? A dilemma is, it's not a problem. A dilemma is there's no good solution. You have two problems, and both solutions are bad. So to this guy dying of alcoholism, drinking, giving up drinking, and dying of alcoholism or the spiritual experience, to normal people would be easy. I'm going to go with the spiritual life. I'm going to go with the change. But to the alcoholic, it's, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do that, even though I'm dying of alcoholism. Only to the alcoholic would that be a dilemma. Where was I? We in our turn sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. What seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. The distinguished American psychologist William James, in his book Varieties of Religious Experiences, indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a loving Creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. And now it's starting to talk about God. And now we're starting to define that as our Creator. Not a doorknob, not a light bulb, our Creator. Those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in light of his past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. In the following chapter, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it, then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who once were in this class are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. So they're saying here that, hey, if you're an agnostic, if you're an atheist, you don't believe in God, that's fine. We don't think that that's going to be an obstacle to a spiritual experience. And it wasn't. It wasn't for me. When I came into alcohol, I had a belief in God. But I would tell you I was without knowledge. I was agnostic. I was without knowledge of how God had ever worked in my life. I'd stood on my own 2 feet all my life. I'd never relied on God. Never handed I'd never had faith, right? But it wasn't a barrier. My biggest barrier to that spiritual experience when I came in here actually was my belief in God, because I believed that I had to believe what I was taught as a child. And I didn't want to believe that. I learned otherwise in this program. Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. Clear-cut directions are going to be shown to us how we recovered. Each individual in the personal stories, he's talking about the personal stories in the back of the book now, which I always thought the personal stories in the back of the book were going to tell me how people got sober, how they stopped drinking, because that's what I came here for, right? But that's not what this is about to tell me. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. These give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. So when we talk about change, I had to change from what I had become into what God intended me to be. And that change for me was to go from being a man who lived his life in reckless disregard for the welfare of those around me to who I am today. That was an inside job, and that was all God. I didn't do that. But it happened in here, and I can't explain it. But exactly as a spiritual experience said, I tapped into some type of inner resource, and I can only call it God. That's what I got for There Is a Solution. And let's open it up.